Darrell J McLeod is Cree from Treaty 8 territory in northern Alberta. Before deciding to pursue writing, he worked as an educator, chief negotiator on land claims for the federal government, and executive director of education and international affairs at the Assembly of First Nations. He holds degrees in French literature and education from the University of British Columbia. He's the author of 2 memoirs, the award-winning Mamaskatch, which in 2018 won the Governor General's Literary Award for nonfiction and was shortlisted for many other prizes, followed by Piyakau 2021, which was also shortlisted for several literary prizes. You know you're doing well when you can just say several literary prizes. He currently lives in Sud, BC, and divides his time between writing and singing in a jazz band. His new book is A Season in Chezgh'un. It's here, it's available for sale at the back, and I can't wait to hear from him. Darrell, the floor is yours.
Okay, now let's go on to Rob. Oh, jeez. That's okay. This is going on. Yes, I was going to. It's okay. I'm a singer, and if you need to, please. Good evening. Darrell Isigaso, Wayo Tsinya. Amiskochi was Kahiro Tsinya. Doris Bertha Negawis and Clifford Notoi. So I did a traditional introduction in my language, which is Nehia or Cree from northern Alberta. And introductions like that, where we say where we're from and who our mother and father is. And I can go on and say my grandfather is my grandmother, and my great-grandmother and great-grandfather on both sides for 7 generations. Things like that are getting increasingly important, aren't they? So I don't write speeches usually. I'm actually going to open with the title of the book, No Vengo a Decir un Discurso, by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, one of my great heroes, literary heroes. It means I'm not here to give a speech. And ironically, it's the title of a book, which is the collection of his speeches that he made, remarkable speeches throughout his time in Central and South America. So I'm not here to give a speech. I'm here instead to just have a conversation. And I've got my timer on, so because my friends tell me I can talk for a long time. So I just want to make sure that I don't take up too much of your time. And I don't want to cut into Lorna's time. Lorna is a precious friend, and I'm so incredibly honored to be speaking with her tonight. This is the story of, I'm writing my next book, which is called The Days After, The Days Before. And I talk about how in my writing career, I've been welcomed into the circle of authors so graciously and so warmly. And Lorna was one of the first to welcome me into that circle in such a beautiful and precious way. And there was no, who is this newcomer? Who's this new kid on the block? And who does he think he is? None of that stuff. It was just wonderful, and it's been wonderful ever since. So, I thought I'd just chat with you a little bit tonight about things that I've learned in my writing career, about myself and about writing. And as my friends tell me, warn me, I can go on. I just use cheat sheets like this, and tonight, I'm a certified comedian as well, and Rob, I think I brought the wrong cheat sheet. But that'll cost you more. No, things I've learned about my writing, I did this in the last few days, and the first thing I learned is that, and the main thing I learned is that I'm not normal. And if you're authors or writers, I don't know if you can relate to that, but it's certainly something that I'm learning increasingly, is that I'm not normal. So what do I mean by that? One of the first and most beautiful things that I learned is that my brain functions differently. In my first book, Mamaskatch, the first chapter is entitled Spirals. And in that chapter I talk about how my mother, Bertha, used to tell stories, and I used to get so frustrated when listening to her as a kid, because in school, the stories were linear. They started, in a certain year, a certain month, a certain day, and went on in time pretty much in a linear fashion. The plot summary was usually linear as well. And when Mom talked, it wasn't like that at all. She talked in circles. And so I get so frustrated sitting there listening to her because she'd open one topic, one theme, and one set of characters, and she'd go into some length describing, well, your dad was sitting over there, and your aunt was sitting there, and your grandfather was sitting there. And then she'd get into what actually happened, sort of the plot, and then she'd go on to she'd set up another scene with a different set of characters, a different plot, and I would just sit there thinking, like, can't you finish one story before you move on to the next? But I learned that if I just sat there and was patient, that eventually she'd circle back around and close off the first story, then close off the second story, and close off the third story. And it wasn't until I was on a speaking tour talking about that book and my subsequent book that I realized that, guess what? My brain works the same way. I used to say that my mother's brain was hardwired for Cree, for our Indigenous language, Keynote. And it came to me as a shock that, it shouldn't have, but it came to me as a shock that my brain is wired the same way. And once I realized that, and I was into writing my third book by the time I realized it, so I was already what some might call of age before I had that realization. But it was such an incredible relief to finally understand why I think the way I do, why I speak the way I do, why I tell stories the way I do, and why I write the way I do. And there's a little wee bit of a moral in that story for you as well, those of you who are writers, who may be writers one day. And that's, don't feel you have to conform to any structures that you might learn in a creative, sorry for the props of creative writing here. Don't feel you have to conform to any structures or patterns in any aspect of your writing. Just let it roll and see where it ends up. Because as you move on, you may learn things about yourself, about your family, about your ancestors, about your mindset. And God knows, increasingly from Calgary, we're from diverse, thankfully, from my perspective, we're from diverse backgrounds. And so our writing will be different than what we learn perhaps in mainstream programs. So that was the first way that I learned that I'm not normal. The other way I'm not normal is that I'm obsessed with writing. And I'm obsessed with music, to the point that it's a bit of a problem. I find it hard to strike a balance. So, one day a week, or at least one day a month, a person should do, the dutiful things like chores around the house, do your banking, meet up with your friends, mow the lawn. And since I've been a writer, all those things are too banal for me. As pretentious as that may sound, it's true. And it's a real struggle because I used to love gardening. I could spend hours in my garden and I still love it. It calls me. I have 3 gardens in my little property and it calls out to me all the time, and I have to be really disciplined to make sure my banking is on track, to make sure that my personal life management is on track. I have to make plans with friends, which I didn't ever used to have to do. I have to make appointments and put them into my calendar because I'm so obsessed with writing and music. And I'm not bragging. It really is a problem. In fact, at a festival I was at on the Sunshine Coast last year, somebody asked me if I was happier now as a writer than I was before, and I had to stop and think. Am I happier? Am I healthier? And I have to be honest with myself. In some ways, I'm not as healthy, because sitting behind a computer, or even if you're standing, for 6 to 8 hours a day, or 12 hours a day on some days, 6 or 7 days a week, isn't physically healthy for your body. It's really important to take those breaks and to do the other things in life that matter. So that really is an issue, and when I say that I'm obsessed with writing, I really am. If I don't write in a day, if I don't at least spend an hour or 2 writing and connecting with my projects, whatever they are at the time, I get miserable. I really do. I feel like life hasn't the same meaning. And nowadays, music is nudging its way in there too, so I doing music about a third of my time. And it's the same if I don't sing every day, and I do mean every day, for at least half an hour to an hour, 2 hours. I'm not happy, I get sad. So that's the other way that I'm not normal, and that's a warning for those of you who may have been bitten by the bug or want to be bitten by the bug. Be careful what you ask for. And then with time, maybe try to put it in perspective. I'm older, so it's a bit different for me because I feel my biological clock ticking in that regard. How many, I'm 65 years old, and I wonder how many books I have left in me, So that's another way I'm not normal. The other thing I learned about is that, I knew this before, but I've come to realize even more since I've been a writer that I'm ultra sensitive. I have thin skin. And that's not necessarily a good thing if you're any kind of artist. As a musician, it's not so bad to be sensitive because you get immediate feedback and people are usually nice and the audience is usually friendly. But as a writer, the writing world can be damn harsh, especially when you're a beginner. And for my first book, I put it out there and people told me, get an agent, that's a good starting place. So I sent it out to 6 agencies, specific agents in 6 different agencies. And from 2 I got immediate rejection. From 2 I got maybes. 1 I didn't hear from for 6 months, and the other one wrote me a really lovely letter saying it was a good book and it should be published, but they weren't the right person to take it on. Well, after 6 months I heard from the person who had been away from work because her father had died, and she told me she wanted to take it on. And that was so great, but she warned me that it could take, not to hold my breath, because it could take up to 12 months to hear back from publishers. But she was going to submit it to 12 different houses. And within 2 weeks, we were fortunate to have a bite. And within another couple of weeks, we had a couple of offers. And I ended up with a 2-book deal. And lo and behold, my first book won the Governor General's Award in 2018 as well, was kindly saying. And so you'd think that would be an easy street for a writer from there on in. And I wrote my second book, Keynote, and it was a 2-book deal, fortunately. But when I submitted it, I had the same insecurity that I'm sure most writers, if not all writers, have. I thought, I didn't hear back from them from my publisher for about 5 months, and I thought, looked at the contract, and there were about 5 out clauses. If it's not submitted on time, they can reject it. If they don't view that it's not the same quality as the first one, they can reject it. There are all kinds of out clauses. So I thought, well, I'm not going to hear back from them then. And then one morning, I was in Puerto Vallarta on vacation, and I got an email from my agent saying that they thought it was the same quality, same level as the first book, and they were happy to publish it. But then I switched to fiction, and I wrote the book that is here tonight with us, A Season in Chezgh'un. And I was thrilled about switching to fiction and writing a novel, and incredibly ambitious with it. And I did a first draft, in, I think it was 2019, and submitted to my agent, and the responses back were brutal. There was no uptake. And so I had to do some serious soul searching and some serious revising. And I did about 3 years worth of revising, and like I say, incredible soul searching about what I was really trying to accomplish in this novel. And the latest book I read on writing was Stephen King's book on writing. And there were a couple of simple points that he makes that stuck with me. And one is, when you're playing track or doing your first draft, your job is to write the story. And then your second job in editing is to cut everything out that isn't the story. So I really took that to heart and went to town on editing and doing cuts. And then my existing publisher picked it up, and they thought it was a great book, and hired another publisher, as they do. And I worked with that publisher for about, another editor. And I worked with her for about 6 months, and we came up with a product I absolutely love. And I did something else that I don't know if any authors do this, but when my book was finished and published in the form that you'll see it at the back, I took a couple of days aside and read it. Read my own book as I would anybody else's book. And guess what? I fell in love with it. I loved it more than I ever did before, and I'm really proud of it. And so another lesson to be learned if you're an author or will be an author, take the time to bond with your work once it's a finished product, to really appreciate the beauty of your own work and bask in it for a while and sit with it for a while and let it feed your soul, your own soul, instead of just feeding the soul of others. So, speaking of editing, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. It's another way, and I haven't really checked in with a lot of authors to see if they do what I do, and I don't think what I do here is normal either. I do extensive editing before I let anybody see my book. So I came up with, in the editing process for my first 2 books, both memoirs, I came up with my own 7-stage editing process. And I follow it religiously and I work through it. Working through it with short stories was fairly straightforward, but working through it with an entire novel is really something else. But I did it. It took me about 18 months to work through my own 7-stage editing process. But it's so worth it. And one of the other things that I do, when I do decide that I'm going to sit down and edit my own work, I treat it as if I would treat the work of somebody else's work. I have to be as respectful of my own work as I would be any other author's work. And I won't go in, once I'm in the editing phase, I won't just open it up one day and flip to a page and see how it is and start mucking around with it. I can't touch it, I won't let myself touch it, unless I go in with a specific purpose. So for example, one purpose might be to look at scene. So I'll spend a month just going through the entire book and looking at all of the scenes and do the scenes work. Are they complete the way I want them to be complete? Or are they snippets the way I want them to be? Are they effective? Another time I'll sit down and just look at dialogue, and I can't fix or work on anything other than dialogue. And that's a rich exercise. And one of the exercises that I do for myself that I haven't, people are always surprised when they tell them about it, and it's I've learned from playwrights to do a beat sheet. So I walk through the time. How does time work in my novel? Time in terms of the entire story and what time frame does it occur. For example, in a season in Chezgh'un, it's a season because it all happens within 1 year. So then I look at how does that flow within the book. You know, is it kind of evenly divided? Does it flow nicely? And then I look at the actual writing. And does it speed up? Does it slow down? How do I deal with that? And do I use some techniques that I've learned for slowing things down incredibly? For example, she set her cigarette in an ashtray, and I watched it burn until it got down to the end. Things like that. So I definitely think I'm abnormal in a lot of ways. And the last way is that I'm also a certified comedian. And in my culture, we have a phenomenon that's called a bullshitter. We have bullshit telling contests. And whether I like it or want it or not, those things are built into my character and into my personality, into my persona as a writer. And so for example, in a season in Chezgh'un, there's a chapter where one of the bigger-than-life characters from the community storms into the principal's office. James is the principal, and this bigger-than-life character, Art, is a teaching assistant in the school, and a culture and knowledge holder from the community. And he storms into James's office and says, principal, we're going to Argentina, you and me. And James, the principal, kind of looks at him and thinks, okay, he's trying to get me. He's recording this conversation. And so James says, okay, Art, what are we going to Argentina for? And Art says, we're going beaver hunting. So James gets even more curious because the duck health people in northern BC, this where my book is set, are great beaver hunters, and so were my people in Ekiao. Beaver was a staple, beaver meat was a staple for us, and the furs, was important to our economy, etc. But James, the principal, is skeptical. He says to Art, like, there are beavers in Argentina? And Art says, well, yes, James. 50 years ago, the government of Argentina and the government of Canada wanted to stimulate the economy in Argentina with fur trade. So they shipped 50 Canadian beavers to Patagonia. And he said, our grandparents warned them that if they were going to ship beavers, they had better damn well ship some of the predators as well, like bears and foxes and wolves. But they didn't listen. They just sent the beavers. And so now it's all out of control. They're eating trees in Patagonia and setting up beaver dams all over the place, and the forest is in trouble, the environment is in trouble. And so he kind of brings James in, and James is unsure what to make of this until he finally sees a letter from the government that it's a go. And he went to Argentina to hunt beavers and to teach the Mapuche people, the indigenous tribe in Argentina, how to hunt beavers. Anyway, I think that's probably my time. I'd love to stay here and tell you some jokes and sing two songs.
Tell us at least
One joke.
Yeah.
One certified joke.
And one song.
Well, it's a bit of a story, but I'll make it brief. So my Auntie Rosie is a staunch Catholic, and my apologies to anybody who's Catholic here, but my Auntie Rosie is a staunch Catholic. And so I was traveling, and I went to Rome once, and I saw these prayer cloths in St. Peter's Square. And you could buy these prayer cloths that were small, medium, and large, and they were all blessed by the Pope. And as a result, they were supposed to have healing properties. So, I wanted to get the biggest one for Auntie Rosie to take to her. She would have treasured it. But I was a student, so I only bought the medium size one and took it to her. But Auntie loved it. And she took that and she held it to her heart and she prayed with it. And then one day she decided she had to put it away, so she stored it in the bathroom, in the closet underneath the sink. And she hid it under all the toilet paper. One day Uncle Charlie was there in the washroom and he ran out of toilet paper. And he reached around, to find toilet paper. There was none. But he found this cloth. He didn't know what it was. He yanks it out and it'll do the trick. And, so he did what he had to do, and he instant pucker. It healed his hemorrhoids. His hemorrhoids were gone forever, so he comes storming out and finds Auntie Rose and says, Rosie, look what happened. I don't have this problem anymore. Isn't that great? It's a miracle. And so Auntie Rosie was just blown away. And so she sealed off the washroom, her and Uncle Charlie. They scrubbed it and sterilized it. Everything in the whole, and they repainted it a sterile white, a beautiful white. And to this day, people still line up outside of that house with their rosaries and holy water in hand to go into the washroom and kneel and make the sign of the cross, dip your hands in the holy water, and pray for a miracle. It's fun.